This video is sponsored by Alpha where you can play fantasy esports such as CSGO, Dota 2, League of Legends, Smite, a whole bunch of them, all different types of tournaments. There's even free tournaments if you just want to try it out. There's ones that go up to $1,000. You can win all sorts of different prize breakdowns, different types of tournaments where you play one person, you play like 30 people, you play hundreds of people, you play thousands of people. It's a pretty cool format if you want to play fantasy esports. If so, check out the description in the link in the description box below. Now, this issue has blown up where Team Liquid and Luminosity are playing an upper bracket match. It was the upper bracket semi-final at the RGN Pro Series or whatever the fuck that land's called that's going on right now in NA. And during a specific round, an incident happened where someone who's like a volunteer guy, who's the friend of a HLTV.org cameraman, this is what we've put together, walks by the PCs and accidentally trips on like a power cable, or his foot kicks it and the power cable comes out and it turns off. Presume it's supposedly fur from Luminosity's PC is what turns off, and obviously this impacts the round. You can't just have a player's PC turning off, and then obviously you're never going to know what would have happened in that round. Now what then happens is Luminosity argue like, oh, the round should be replayed in this scenario, but RGN put out an interview with HLTV.org where they claim that the rule that they have in their rule book says that in such a scenario where action has taken place in the round, whether that's damage happening to people, shooting of weapons, kills, then the round is then considered live and cannot be restarted. Now, here's what's interesting. So then there was this discussion that supposedly took place between the two teams, Luminosity and Liquid, and the admins. And supposedly, it's implied, as I'll get to, that the admins then told Liquid, like, here are the rules, but, you know, we'll maybe give you like an option, kind of implying like you could say, yes, but we'll choose to replay the round, in which case the round would be replayed, and that's the way it would go. Now, first and foremost, as it stands right now, we can only go off the statement of the guy who's the CEO of RGN, who's come out and said all this stuff. Now, there's a tweet that came out just before I started making this video from the Luminosity owner that claims that owner guy has contacted him and he says that there's going to be some sort of retraction of this, or they're going to update it, or they're going to reply to some inaccuracy that he said in the interview. But until that happens, we can't know that. So we have to just go off what we have now. I think it's a very interesting topic, regardless of what the particulars are, which we will get into, just in terms of how people are reacting to it. So let's start off with this issue. So the notion is that the rule exists like that, and so afterwards, it's the job of the admins to consult the rules, figure out what it is, and then make a ruling on the situation. So they ask him in the HLTV.org interview, this guy with the CEO who's called Matt David, they ask him, how was the rule explained and or what transpired after that? And then it says, the admins said that the round can't be reset because the round went live. Luminosity was upset about that, which is understandable, considering the circumstances over why they were disconnected. Remember, it was like an external person who's not even to do with the event in theory. So it's not even like it's one of them who's accidentally kicked it out. It's nothing to do with them. They came upstairs to talk because they had a problem with the issue, and they were asking Hiko and Liquid to restart, which is fair play technically, but the admin maintained that the round can't be restarted. Next question. And what do you think about the decision? The owner then says, I agree with the decision because even if Hiko and them, Team Liquid, wanted to restart, that gets into bias and morale. I think he means like morals them, I'm not sure. That sets a precedent for players disconnecting their own power cables and claiming that someone else did it. While, of course, with Luminosity, the situation was a total accident, but I still firmly believe that the rule stands because it needs to be there to avoid a slippery slope. So here's the first topic to get into, the issue of how you uphold rules in tournaments. Before we get into the minutiae of that, let me just state up front, just as an interesting piece of context for this whole situation. I agree that on the surface, this doesn't sound like a good rule. It sounds as though it's a real grey area. It sounds like a lot of fucked up shit could happen that people could do to mess with you, for example. That could mean that you'd lose rounds in this scenario. I don't like the way it's done. And I actually do, personally, think that if it was up to me, if I had the choice to rewrite the rule book, I would probably, without knowing the details of the other aspects of like what would be the possible contingencies for if someone did kick out their own cable on purpose and how would you police that, that's all going to be difficult, I admit that. But if it was up to me to rewrite the rule book, I would in nearly all scenarios like this go in favor of a rule that said in such a scenario, as long as you deem it not to have been like foul play, as in someone did kick their own cable out, you probably should replay the round. In general, in nearly all scenarios, in scenarios where there's a tied game and they used to go on round difference, in scenarios where like this happens, someone disconnects, in scenarios where there's like a bug with the bomb or something, I'm actually in many scenarios like this often in favour of just replaying the round or a few rounds of the game or an overtime session. And the reason why I'm in favour of that generally is because it then means that, first of all, yes, in a way, you have kind of fucked over the team that won the round technically within the normal scenario, but they didn't win the round technically as a normal situation anyway, so it's not really that fair to just count it as standing. And secondly, it's also the case that you then let both teams replay the scenario. So in theory, the team that won the scenario can win again anyway. And if they are ultimately, it's not that if they're the better team, they will win, but if they are the better team overall, they've got a good chance still of winning, probably a better chance than the opponent in many of these situations. And so I generally would rather have playing Counter-Strike decide who wins rounds and halves under normal circumstances than admin decisions. So as a general philosophy, here's the thing. I'm not in favour of rules like this. I don't think this rule is good, but that's exactly the point of this video, is that if that really is the rule, then RGN must uphold that rule no matter what in this specific situation. Maybe if the situation was totally different and there was some like clause to the rule, it could be different. Now in this, the way that their rule book is set out, they have to uphold this rule. That is actually ethically what they have to do. And in the scenario of fairness, it's actually only fair to uphold the rule, because that rule could have been used earlier in the tournament on people in scenarios where people didn't offer someone a replay and they weren't even asked for it. It wasn't in this case, but could have been. So you have to have consistency in how the rules are applied across the whole tournament. It doesn't matter if both teams actually had come to an agreement, like let's replay the round. Let's say not only that, let's say Team Liquid and Hiko had even gone to RGN begging them, please, we want to just replay the round, please. Doesn't matter. In that scenario, RGN should still uphold the round and should even say, I'm sorry, it's actually irrelevant what you Luminosity think and it's irrelevant what you Team Liquid think. We're going to uphold the rule that's in our rule book regardless. That's the way that they should operate as admins. In fact, the whole thing is, players should have no say in how rules are interpreted or how rules are decided. That's not their job. They are players, they play. It's the job of admins to make the case. Because if you allow players to be involved, if you even consult players in this particular scenario, then first and foremost, that does literally introduce bias, because now you're taking the opinions of players and you're letting them influence you and you're weighing up what one player says versus another player and deciding who is right. That's not none of your job. The job of the tournament is you have an admin. His job is to enforce the rules. The rules say this, therefore the admin enforces that, and he says to the players, even if they both say want to restart, sorry, the rules aren't that case, and you have to play on. Now, after the fact, yes, if you're Luminosity, you could then blame the rules and say, I don't like these rules, I think they're badly done. If you really want to be an asshole, you could say that these people are pieces of shit and all the kind of things they did. I think that's probably a bit above and beyond, but okay, we can understand their outrage in this scenario. The key thing is, though, you shouldn't even be consulting players, because actually when you consult players in this particular scenario, it's also then going to get into this fucked up scenario that we've got now. So because supposedly, and there's different reports on this, because supposedly RGN did see that this is the rule, decided they were going to maintain it, but then offered Team Liquid this out, which is essentially saying, we'll let you violate the rules. They've now created this whole scenario where it's Team Liquid and now Hiko representing Team Liquid who are getting all the hate. Yet in this scenario, Team Liquid should have no say even if they wanted a replay. So the guy who was the manager of Luminosity said like that the admins cited the rule but advised Team Liquid to use good sense. They said, bracket, Hiko said no to a restart. Again, what the fuck are these RGN admins doing? Taking a scenario where they have a rule themselves that they themselves have put in a rule book, and now they have an admin whose job is to enforce that rule, but then they're saying, but you know what, listen, like politically and stuff, use good sense, what would you want to do in this scenario here? Shouldn't even be doing that. It's actually fucked up that they would ever even pose that question, so that now someone who uses linear logic, like a lot of these Outrage fans are doing, could go, oh, well, the real reason the round wasn't replayed is because, let me follow the chain of what would have had to happen. Oh, wait a second, at this point here, Hiko didn't agree to a restart. That's why it didn't happen. Now, what's fucked up is, I always say this, you can't use linear logic like this, follows that, and that's why it happened. Because what you often have to do, to be fair, is you have to look at what initially caused the problem. So what caused the problem initially is that the rule is different, and you can't do the restart. It's not this other part here. The fact that they then chose to violate their own rules, RGN, is bullshit. They've actually fucked up themselves there, and then they've asked Team Liquid, which is to fuck up, and then they've possibly allowed a scenario where they would allow that violation of the rule to continue through the tournament. So in that scenario, they shouldn't be doing that whatsoever, and they fucked up big time if that's what indeed happened. Remember, we have to go on the information we have. At the moment, to say, oh, that's obviously a lie, well, what evidence do you have? Oh, but on someone's Snapchat, they said, again, that's fucking like eyewitness testimony or second or third hand eyewitness testimony, which is significant, which is the weakest type of evidence, by the way. And so that's all hearsay, that's all speculation. We can only go on the information we have right now and logically deduce things from it. And by the way, people aren't logical creatures by default. Logic is a processes of the mind and how you model information and how you figure out what fits here and what follows in that scenario, and is this actually consistent, or is this a fallacy in my thinking as to how I got to this point of view? That's what I'm trying to emphasize here. Now, here's the thing. Where this gets murky is people then brought up other instances. So they said that at Sivo LAN, that just happened a couple of weeks ago, Shazam, he was bringing this up, and Conquest, and the team he plays for, had a situation against Mouse Sports, where if you remember, it was in the B site on Cash, and God B lagged out during like a 2v2 or something, and Conquest won the round. So it was paused, there was discussion, it was decided that the round would be replayed, and actually, from what I remember, I think Mouse Sports won that round, and then they also went on to win the game, which they probably would have won anyway, but that also, if you're using linear logic, would be like the key point where it's like, oh, but we would have had that round, and then XYZ would have had the money in the next round, they wouldn't have money, you know, all that scenario. That's where people, who no one actually had outrage over it, but you could have thought that way if you'd been Conquest. No, they didn't, it was all great, and everyone said, oh, what great fair play from them and all the rest of it. First and foremost, let's be logical. That's a different tournament with a different rule set. Now, let's ask this question. Here's what Shazam and them didn't mention. Was the rule for Sivo identical? Because if it was identical, you ready? If it was identical in Sivo, that there's a rule saying that you don't restart, and you remember, the admin's supposed to enforce that, but they then inquired of the two teams, and because Conquest agreed to restart, which Mouse would obviously want because it's in their benefit, then they restarted the round, then guess what? Sivo has fucked up. They have violated their own rules in their own tournament. Therefore, what relevance do all of their rules have? That they can just be violated last second by the players deciding. That's ridiculous. So actually, it doesn't matter that Shazam and Conquest seem like nice guys. Yes, I agree. The impulse, the intention of what they're trying to do there is good, but the rules have been violated of that tournament, and that is not a good thing. Now, here's the thing. People likewise also said, but when Luminosity Gaming's in these scenarios, they always choose to restart and they always allow teams to replay. Again, that is irrelevant because in this scenario, this is a different tournament with potentially a different rule set. If it has the same rule set, then they're letting rules be violated in other tournaments. Okay, we understand what they're trying to do, what they call fair play, but that's not the way the rules are operating. If a rule is faulty, this is how it works. To fix it, you have to wait till the tournament is over so that the rule remains consistent in that tournament. Then after the tournament, you fix it then. Because what happens, right, if in a group stage game, they did this rule here, and then someone decided to let the replay happen, violating the rules, but then later on, the same happens now, and then the team says, well, we're just going to stick with the rules, and then something different happens. You haven't consistently applied the rule of the tournament, therefore the tournament itself becomes quite a joke in terms of the legitimacy of the circumstances it was played under. It wasn't played under fair rules for the whole time, consistent rules. Unfortunately, you have to wait till after the tournament, as fucked up as that is for people like Luminosity, and then it has to be changed after the fact, hopefully due to outrage like this, to be a rule that's better, like either better articulated, so it has all clauses for different situations. But if it is a guy who accidentally kicks, all that stuff. If not, you have to just maintain it. I'm sorry, you can't change it within a tournament. That's ridiculous. Because if you can invalidate a rule or change a rule, then you can invalidate other rules and you can change other rules. Like, for example, during a round, something could happen. And let's say, for example, you ready? Let's say in this particular game that Hiko had gotten like one of those crazy, like really lucky 3 kills with the Tech 9 where 2 bullets, even he was kind of like, oh, that was bullshit. Like I was barely even aiming that guy and then just headshot them. Let's say Luminosity came to him, paused the game and then said, come on, man, you know that's kind of bullshit. Like that gun shouldn't be so broken. Like that, like just restart the round and we'll start again and, like just play it out and we'll do as normal. What if he just said, yeah, okay, so now we can just restart rules any rounds anytime we want. We can, in all these scenarios, we can just let the players decide the fucking rules of the tournament, can we? No, that's ridiculous. Just like in football, people are referencing football scenarios of fair play. Okay, so in football, if someone comes up and does a mega bad slide tackle that really fucks up the other guy, but then the ref goes, well, the rules say I should give this player a red card, but I'll ask the guy who's injured, what do you want me to do? Should I give him a red card or should I let him off? Now, first of all, the pressure that would put on that player, and he'd be hated by fans if he decided not to have the player sent off. And let's say the player says, nah, don't send him off. What? So now players can invalidate the rule system itself and they can just all foul each other as long as they all agree that that's how the game should be played. And now the rules of fair play within the game don't even exist because now it's just a free-for-all of whatever anarchy, of whatever each person decides within the scenario. No, that wouldn't make any sense whatsoever. There's also the situation, like what if the players instead had said, okay, you know what? We won't restart because of time constraints, but instead what we'll do is we'll just play the round again, but as a 1v1 knife to decide who should have won the round. Now, I don't care if the players agree that. That is not the rules, it's not the way it's upheld, and that should not be done. There's also the issue that when they mention that thing about, but if players were to sabotage by taking the power cables out, yes, it is true. In this scenario, knowing what we know, the basic facts we have, that does seem ridiculous, because that isn't what happened as far as we can tell. But the problem is, you probably do need clauses within this sort of a rule, like sub-clauses, that explain what happens in certain scenarios depending on who it was who kicked the cable out. Because obviously, for example, you don't want it to be possible for the opponent to kick the cable out and then screw you out the round and win the round. But likewise, you don't want a scenario ever, which would happen at some lands. I'm not saying this one, I'm not saying Luminosity, but there are some people in this world, believe it or not, if they knew this rule existed, who would try kicking their own cable out by accident, or accidentally kick a teammate out, or ask a friend to walk by and knock it out if they were losing. This would happen. So the key point I'm making here is, the rule isn't great, but you do need things to be on paper like this, and you need them on paper in advance so that you can apply it now and say, here's what the rule is written now. And you need it ideally to be as well articulated as possible, as much information detailing the specifics of each case and what the specific outcome is. You don't want any vagueness or grey area, because then it comes into interpretation, and then you get into this political drama of what did the admin decide and what could the players have had to say about it. Now, there's also some past examples of similar scenarios of admin disputes, which really brings to light the outrage element of this, where people are going crazy and name calling and impugning people's honour and their fucking like ethics as a human being and what pieces of shit they are and all this sort of crap. So there's three key examples I'm thinking of in history. Now, one, which is a great one, is actually to do, you ready, with a Brazilian team playing against an American team. Perfect, right? So the team was Team 3D, this North American team. They in theory, in the normal team, they had a Canadian player, but this is for World Cyber Games, so it was an all-American lineup. It was Team 3D. It was at World Cyber Games 2003 in Korea. I think it was in Seoul. And the opponent was Made in Brazil, MIBR, who was famously the best Brazilian team. And they played a game, and from what I remember, it was like a best-of-3 series. From what I remember, I think it was on Aztec, and there was some kind of a bug. I think it was like a flash bug or something like that. And what happened was they paused the game, they were discussing all this stuff, and what happened was, again, admins were like a bit weak-willed and they weren't wanting to enforce the rules, or they were like saying, well, this is technically the rule, but what should we do here? And Moto, the in-game leader of Team 3D, basically just said, I've read the rule book, here's the rule, you must enforce this rule, which meant that there wouldn't be like, I can't remember what happened, but in the end it was in favour of Team 3D, whereas the Brazilian team were the one who were complaining and probably were screwed over in terms of like, if we could rewrite the rules, we'd change it in that scenario, make it fair and replay the round. He just said, right, this is the rule, you have to enforce it. And so it got enforced, Team 3D won the match. I think that map was pretty close. I think it was like a 13-11, because we used to use Max Rounds 12 then, not Max Rounds 15. And then in the end, they won the series overall. And so what happened was tons of Brazilian fanboys like went on Gotfrag, which was the equivalent of HLTV.org at the time, and just spammed it, saying like, what piece of shit, faggots, and all sorts of outrageous shit to all these players, how they should all die, how Moto's a piece of shit, you go on a cunt, all this stuff, going absolutely mental. And really, it really did like, okay, it set up a cool rivalry, but it was actually quite a fucked up spectacle in terms of what happened. Flash forwards in time, and within CSGO, we have two incidents that remind me of this. So at Dreamhack Bucharest 2013, which I think was in September, I think it was in September of 2013. They had a match in the group stage where Fnatic, which at the time was four of the players that you know from the winning Fnatic lineup, which was Schneider, Devilwalk, JW, and Flusher, those four. But at the time they had Modi, who was a really skilled player, as their in-game leader. This is one of the early tournaments that he was playing for them. And what happened was they played Train, which was famously a very strong map of NIP, and they beat NIP on it in overtime. But what it turned out was NIP noticed that the overtime had been played in the wrong format. Now, I forget which way around it was. I think the way around it was that the admins initially played the overtime in MR3 for overtime. Fnatic won it. And then I think this is the order. If not, it was the other way around in terms of it was MI5 instead of MR3. Then NIP went to the admins and said, right, the rules actually say that it had to be played MR5 if that's the way around it was. And so we need to replay the overtime. So obviously Fnatic, who've just beaten the legendary Nip, who'd lost very few times on LAN at that point in time, they've just accomplished this massive feat, and obviously they're upset about that. And they're like, oh, this is bullshit, but they play the overtime and they win. Now, do you remember the fallout of that? That was where, because the Fnatic players were so upset at what had happened, and knowing that Nip had been involved somehow in the restart of the game happening, which they thought was just because Nip was salty they'd lost, they then didn't shake their hands, and they did the thing where they elbowed them, or they were shouting shit to them, Moddy and JW. And famously, that's why people to this day hate on JW. Interestingly, I wonder if Luminosity fans hate on JW, because it's the same exact scenarios happen with Luminosity. But what's interesting is, in that scenario, I myself initially, because I hadn't looked at the rules, was really outraged, because I thought like, oh, Nip's obviously just done this to fuck with the Fnatic guys. Plus, again, as I said, I generally agree with scenarios where, I mean, in this case, it didn't make sense because they did replay it in that one, so it was different in that sense. But I generally agree, like, if they could, it shouldn't be possible. Obviously, I would like it if players could be like, oh, we'll just do the reasonable thing where we let the game decide what happened, not just rule, lawyering, etc. But that is the way it played out. And when I think about it now, it was the correct decision actually from Nip. Nip was totally within their rights. Nip weren't being douchebags at all. That was literally the rules of the tournament. If they played a different overtime later in the tournament, it would have been with the normal rule set once enforced. So it doesn't make any sense to play an earlier match with that rule set. And by the way, in the end, Fnatic won anyway, and they got through. And actually, that result actually ended up fucking Very Games, who had to play Nip in the round of 8, even though Very Games won their group. So interesting scenario there. Very Games could have been salty too. So then you move forwards, there was quite a more recent example, which is at Dreamhack Winter 2014, the major last year. We all know the boost scenario that happened on the third map of the quarterfinals. It was Fnatic versus LDLC, the French team, now envious. And Olofmeister did that boost on CT side of Overpass, and they won all the rounds and they won the game. Now, the admin decision there took hours and hours, and the rules were all over the place, and people were citing rules from old rule books that weren't even in the current Dreamhack rule book, and then they went literally late into the night over this discussion. Now, here's what's interesting. The reason why LDLC massively won the public PR battle of that, and how in the end it probably was the right decision for PR, for Fnatic to forfeit the match, let LDLC move on, and LDLC end up winning the major as a result of that outcome, is because LDLC purposely played the political game, made tweets about it, used hearsay, and fucked with the public perception of Fnatic, which at the time was at an all-time low, because not only have Olofmeister done this boost, which people were outraged at, it's potentially ruined the great game. Everyone thought Flash had cheated. There was all this shit going on. Some people still hated JW for the shit in the past anyway. There was all the aim lock clips of all the players. So understandably, Fnatic's stock was at all-time low. A lot of people like LDLC, and they think LDLC screwed out the game. And then LDLC made all these tweets saying stuff like, we've been locked out of the venue. Meanwhile, we saw Khan and Devilwalk discussing things with the admins privately, which in meetings we weren't allowed to go to. Now I can tell you, I was at that event and I followed up with all these people. I went to admins, I went to people afterwards, I went to those players, and I said to them, give me your side of it. Explain to me what details you know. And here's what I pieced together. Actually, that was LDLC's perception of what happened, which was themselves an exaggeration of information they didn't have. As in, the lack of information made a vacuum where they projected into it what they thought was happening, which was a big conspiracy against them because it was a Swedish team and Swedish admins at a Swedish event, and they're French, so they were like, well, they're obviously conspiring against us. So what actually happened in that scenario, I'll break it for you now, is that there was a meeting at the event where Devilwalk and Khan, etc., just were in the event anyway, at some sponsor booth, hanging out or whatever, and they just chose not to go home for the night, where the admin said, right, go home for the night. And so LDLC went home, and these guys stayed, not even with the admins, just at a different part of the venue. Because if you remember, Dreamhack's an all-night LAN that goes on for 4 or 5 days. It's 24 hours, you can go in and out, etc. So they were off at the hotel room. Now, when the LDLC players heard that Devilwalk and Khan were at the venue, they then projected and assumed, right, they're talking to the admins the whole time, they're screwing us and figuring out something. And in the end, remember the outcome, Fnatic forfeit, and actually it was the guys from LDLC who got to move on in this scenario. So what he said wasn't even, what LNBK, who's the guy who tweeted it, actually said didn't even seem to fit with the facts. And that's never actually come out because everyone involved just wanted to let it lie and let the tournament go on because Fnatic had gone out, LDLC moves on, let's just forget all about that drama. But it's an interesting example of this sort of scenario where the notion that a conspiracy could exist, especially if the admin is of the same nationality as the player, which I understand why you'd be suspicious of that, but you can't just read into it with no facts and no evidence, or just assert it especially considering what inflammatory material that's going to be. So the common trend there is, in terms of the conspiracy, that the more popular team or the team that has people of the same nationality as the admin will be able to influence them. That's also, by the way, where you don't like players have a say in this particular scenario. You can ask them to ask the admin, oh, what is the ruling? They can ask for information one way, but it should never be a two-way street where they're giving influence and tips and advice, or even having a say in the outcome themselves to the admin. That should not be. That's the job of the admin. If the admin can't do that, you need different admins, and you need harsh admins who enforce these rules. Now, a problem here is that not only are people who hate Hiko anyway, who obviously because of all the teams he's been around and people know he asks for a lot of money, people naturally are biased against him anyway. But beyond that, now you've got all these Brazilian fans going fucking ham on Hiko, Team Liquid, and not even that much the tournament. Yet, in reality, if we look at it, by the order of how things should have worked, the only person you can actually blame is the tournament. Doesn't matter if the tournament offered Hiko this choice, they shouldn't be doing that. They fucked up by doing that. So the only person you could really be getting upset at is RGN. In general, I'd say get upset at the rule. Okay, get upset at them that they had the rule in there, but maybe they haven't thought it through and didn't know this sort of scenario could happen. Now, they should fix it next time. We agree it's a horrible situation. I can even understand why Brazilian fans and why Luminosity themselves are upset. It's understandable. It would feel unfair. It would feel like, oh, come on, man, you could just say replay and we could do it again. But that's not the way the rules work. And if you yourself as Luminosity would later on want other rules enforced in the tournament, then you can't have this rule invalidated. Now, I don't care, by the way, if Luminosity, but we would let the other rules go as well. Doesn't matter. That's not the way the world works. We need civilization here, guys. It's not just madness of people just deciding whatever the fuck they want on the fly in a tournament where we have to have defined rules. So, and putting pressure on other people to break the rules and violate the way that the structure of the tournament's supposed to work. Now, a problem here is that not only are fans going crazy, that happens with all these outrages like it did with the ones I mentioned in the past, but the reason why it reminded me of the 3D vs MIBR one is because, as I said, it wasn't just that fans were going crazy, they were going fucking ham. Like, Brazilian fans were going absolutely ham. Some of them were saying, like, here's all Hiko sponsors, let's contact them all and fuck him up and make sure he never gets sponsored again. Really? Because he just chose to have the rules upheld at a tournament he's playing in. What a ridiculous notion that is. Or he's a piece of shit because he did that. Now, in the 3D scenario that happened in this situation, it just highlighted what I've seen many times in CS 1.6. I've been around Counter-Strike since Beta 1, and I've followed the pro scene since retail, basically, because that was when the first big tournaments really happened. It's like 1.0 onwards, which was, as far as I know, in I think it was in about September or October of 2000. So I've been following the pro scene the whole time, seen every big game, seen every big tournament. And I've repeatedly seen that Brazilian fans, and they're not the worst in general, they are among the worst in terms of just being annoying, obnoxious, and actually incredibly rude. Not just saying that this person is shit or whatever, just saying that you're a piece of shit, fuck your mother, die, whore, you should be killed. This sort of totally outrageous. And by the way, again, it is just online comments. I don't take those totally seriously. I don't take them at face value. But you're going a bit far on that sort of shit, surely. So, in general, it was quite known, by the way, in CS Counter-Strike, in the community. This was known that Brazilian fans were quite annoying like this. And by the way, they're not the only ones. Because, for example, it's funny that they share Portuguese. The Fox fans, Portuguese fans, who were just mega fans of Fox, were equally obnoxious. And then there were other countries who were famously obnoxious, who we could easily cite. I mean, you can probably guess some of them. Who, they're the fans, yeah. A lot of fans are idiots. A lot of fans say stupid things. A lot of fans act emotionally. But these people, for whatever reason, presumably some cultural aspect of the way they communicate with each other, they just went really extreme with how they would do it compared to even the normal outrage and reaction. So I used to remember on hitchhilltv.org, there would be threads. This is why a lot of people thought that a lot of the Brazilian fans were kind of brain dead, because there would be threads, right? And the thread could be like, who is better, Vale or Veslan, like Swedish Orpas, okay? And someone would just come in the thread, someone with an account that had a Brazilian flag, and just say, Kogu. I say, well, that wasn't even the topic. That's nothing to do with it. And so people would just think, oh, what idiots. There's such blind fanboys. And it's not that they all were, but there clearly was a large contingent of them. Whether that's a majority or not, I doubt it. It's probably just a very, very vocal minority, but a large minority at that. Now, it is bullshit, in my opinion, that Luminosity, I think it was Cold Zero, is coming out making tweets, implying that, Team Liquid is trash and toxic. It's understandable they're mad, but you're being a bit ridiculous there. There's also examples within Brazilian culture. So I follow MMA, and I've seen nearly all the UFCs that were held in Brazil. And there's a famous scenario that the comedian Joe Rogan, who's a color commentator for the UFC, has repeated, where he asked a translator once, what are these people shouting in the crowd after an American fighter beats a Brazilian fighter, or even sometimes after he even lost? And it was something like, I can't remember the term, something like Fiago, or something like that. And Basically, the translator said, "Oh, they're just chanting for a player, a fighter called Fago or something." Even that didn't make sense because there wasn't one. And what happened was Joe Rogan asked another person who's a Brazilian, and they said, "Oh no, the crowd's all chanting faggot to him." Yeah, the entire stadium, even though the guy won the fight legit, this American fighter, over a Brazilian fighter, and he's even shook hands and even said in the microphone, you know, like, "I love Brazil, like, thank you for watching me fight." The whole crowd, well, I can't say the whole crowd, I guess, whoever was chanting, a large amount, you could hear it on the mic in the actual UFC, was chanting the equivalent of like, "Faggot, faggot, faggot." I mean, within the context of like Western values of what we think of in like first world European countries and North America, that's considered extremely rude and kind of fucked up and doesn't promote fair play, sportsmanship, being a polite person, being civilized. That's just the way our perception of culture is. Now, admittedly, things might be different there. Okay, we understand things are different around the world. It's also not the end of the world to do that, by the way. If I was a guy who's a UFC fighter, you get booed by other people. American fans sometimes go USA to the other guy, whatever. It isn't the end of the world, but it's kind of douchey. We have to look at that, and that's the way our perception of it is. There's also, by the way, if you want to see how perfect my predictive powers are, I predict this video will have tons of comments in the YouTube comments about how I'm a faggot, how they've all fucked my mother, and she's a whore, and she should have aborted me, you know, I should die, I'm obviously just sucked Hiko's dick, sucked Team Liquid's dick, sucked Argen's dick, whatever it might be. There'll be tons of those comments. Many of them, by the way, won't even be transparent. They'll be from like accounts that are obviously like Brazilian names, like Eduardo or whatever it'll be. There'll be like ridiculous ones. I mean, it'll literally have people like, oh, let me think. How does a Brazilian accent go? Like, "My gosh, oh my gosh, this is Hiko, this is bullshit." I can't do the accent that way. "You take a rule here, you do not apply to this. This is no respect for me, no respect for Hiko." Oh my gosh, that's not bad actually. I've done some Brazilian jiu-jitsu, so I know what Brazilian people sound like. Now, here's the fucked up scenario in this situation. The reason why I've cited all that about Brazilian people and Brazilian fans in CS in that scenario, you might think, oh, that's a bit fucked up. Why are you bringing Brazil into it? Why are you talking about the whole Brazilian people? I'm not actually. I'm talking about my life experiences over 15 years, observing lots of different Brazilian people over totally different ones over different years and how they responded to different scenarios. And this is my life experience. One thing I despise in modern culture is the notion that political correctness, these bizarre rules that no one agreed to, by the way, and weren't like the RGN rules that we all take part in, but that someone just arbitrarily decided socially, "I'm going to force you to have this rule." It's not even a rule, mate. It's just a guideline. No, it's going to be a rule now in society of what we should do. They impose this notion that you're supposed to ignore all your life experiences. Your life experiences are invalidated. You're supposed to treat everyone from every country as though they're identical in terms of their cultural background, the way they behave, and the reasons they do things as you, which totally invalidates your own life experience. That's not the way life is. Whereas personally, if I've had some negative experiences, that's going to colour how I think of people from that area. Now, it doesn't mean I'll necessarily treat them unfairly, but it'll be in the back of my mind, and I'll be thinking, is there anything similar in terms of what's happening here? And if I've had many experiences with certain people from a certain country or a certain culture of them behaving a certain way, then I'm going to say, when I'm talking about these scenarios, oh, I've seen past scenarios where it was also in this way, and that's the general trend I've observed. That's not the end of the world. The notion that that's somehow racist is ludicrous. So I will never back down on shit like that, and fuck anyone who thinks that that's like, oh, that's unacceptable. And then even better, if they're guys who have no experience of that culture or that country, and they're just guys who are sat on a computer in America, they're 18 years old, and they've just heard some like super liberal social justice warrior type professor tell them, oh, that's the way the world should be. No, we're not having that virus infect our brains and take over us, mate. Sorry. Now, here's what's funny. Again, so at the beginning I explained that I'm actually not in favour of rules like that. I don't think it's a good rule. What's funny is, if I even had to tell you, outside the context of this, which of the two teams is my favourite to watch, it would actually be Luminosity. I think Luminosity's a wicked team. I've made a video about them. Maybe I'll link it there. Luminosity does it right or something like that. They're a team where I love their approach to the game. The tactical approach seems really sound. I love that they've managed to take the limited talent they have in their region, guys like Fur. Now they've managed to find Cold Zero, who's like an absolute gem. The Fallen's switched back to AWPing. I love all the stuff about their game. They seem like a wicked team. I love that they managed to get these single map upsets over better teams. They haven't really won many best of threes so far, but even so, they're a really fun team to watch, really cool team. I even like how dedicated they are, how hardworking they've come to NA. In theory, they haven't made as many excuses as the NA teams have for not being as good as Europeans. But with all that said, this is bullshit, the way they're behaving here. Like it's not the end of the world. We can fix this quite easily. Just apologise or just say, oh, I overreacted. Like, I realise now the tournament were the ones to blame, and just move on. It shouldn't be the end of the day, and people shouldn't be bringing this up. Even I didn't agree with people bringing it up on the JW situation years after the fact, as though like it's some crime at the end of the century, and he had to just be grovelling in fucking sackcloth and the gnashing of his teeth and the wailing, oh God, please, I've sinned. No, it was one small scenario where he said sorry, and that should be the end of the situation. And actually, it had nothing to do with anyone involved. And the idea that he owes you an apology is ridiculous. Apologise to the other people and then go on with your life. That should be the end of it. Likewise, I don't think it should be the same with Luminosity. And even though all these brilliant fans are going to call me a faggot, I don't care, mate. I'm used to that, as I've explained, and I don't really give a fuck. This is the situation as I saw it. Thanks to Alpha Draft for the mad Skrilla.